when a young family seeking a bright future moves into a new house. It seems as if their dreams have come true until a malevolent force makes itself known. Tormented visions and violent attacks leave them all questioning just what insidious force slithers behind the walls of their new home. Will they make it out alive, or will the entity known as Sallie keep them as playmates forever? This is a case I have personal experience with, and it certainly is very unnerving. I wouldn't recommend watching this video in the dark unless you like a challenge. Located in northeast Kansas is a town known as Atchison, situated on the bluffs of the Missouri River and offering sweeping views of the river valley beyond. Grand Victorian homes and cobblestone roads recall glorious days when wealthy lumber merchants and railroad magnates once occupied the town. But as one walks the streets today, they can't help but feel a tingle down their spine and a cold shudder in their soul. It seems to be a kind of hotspot that harbors otherworldly forces. The time is March of 1993. Newly married couple Tony and Deborah Pickman begin renting a house in Atchison. After weeks of unboxing their belongings, their new house is finally starting to feel like a home. In the words of Tony Pickman, "We had finally moved into a new place. My wife was expecting, and we were just very much looking forward to starting a family together. It was a good time for us." And with Deborah Pickman later saying that, "We thought the home was perfect for us. It was spacious, it had several bedrooms, and we just knew that it was the perfect house." But what they failed to realize was that this house was far from perfect for anyone. After about a month of living there, strange things began to occur. First, the TV began to turn on and off by itself, and small objects like their keys began to move on their own. Thinking that perhaps they were misremembering where they had placed their keys, and the TV turning on and off was possibly faulty wiring, they contacted their landlord about the matter. But after having an electrician come out, he would find nothing wrong with the wiring. Although old, it was functioning as intended. Although the Pickmans thought the happenings were strange, they simply overlooked them. Later that summer, Deborah would give birth to a baby boy who they would name Taylor. And when the young family comes back home from the hospital, Deborah's sister Karen flies in from Buffalo, New York, to help her sister get some much-needed rest as she begins to heal from giving birth and starts adjusting to taking care of a newborn. Although the help is greatly appreciated, it seems to pass quickly. Although the Pickmans are still adjusting to the late-night cries of their newborn son, his cries seem to wake up more than just his parents. One afternoon, while Tony hangs pictures upstairs, he sees a shadow move out of the corner of his eye. He then hears the giggle of a little girl. Finding this odd, he glances around his general area, and it's here that he discovers something even stranger. There in his son's nursery on the floor is all of Taylor's stuffed animals, neatly arranged in a circle. Thinking this was bizarre, they ultimately would laugh it off, thinking that perhaps someone they knew had come into the home and played a prank on them, that perhaps they didn't notice it until now. They thought that maybe Tony's brother Alan, who was a known prankster, was to blame. Laughing it off, they went back to what they had been doing previously. It wasn't until a few minutes later that Deborah would walk back by the nursery and notice the exact same thing had occurred again. All of her son's stuffed toys were arranged in a circle, and all facing outward, yet again on the floor. Now, unsure of what was causing these strange happenings, they checked all their windows and doors. They were all locked. If it was Tony's brother Alan, they don't know how he would have been getting in and out without any of them noticing, and within a matter of minutes. The following morning, Tony had his brother come over to their house. It's important to note that Alan did live next door to the Pickmans at this time. Once they had all gotten settled on the couches in the living room, Tony began to ask, "So Alan, just how did you get in and out of our house last night without any of us noticing?" It was in this moment that Tony began to worry. Although he and his brother had always played tricks on one another, his brother wasn't known to be a liar. Alan looked back at him genuinely confused. He told Tony that he had no idea what he was talking about, that he wasn't even home last night. Finding an opportunity for a laugh, however, Alan then starts asking Tony if he thinks that he has a ghost. He then takes his brother's camera and starts snapping photos around the house while asking, "Is there a presence here with us? And if so, make the stuffed animals move again. Do something." As Tony and Deborah follow Alan, the three are then left in utter shock as a stuffed bear sitting on a nearby small chair is suddenly thrown onto the floor by something they can't see. Taking what they had just seen as some kind of a warning, Tony, Deborah, and Alan take baby Taylor and rush outside into the family's vehicle. As the baby cries as Tony buckles him into the car seat, Tony cries as well, but out of pain. He suddenly feels a sharp, stinging sensation coming from his back. Thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finishes buckling the baby in and then closes the door. He figures he'll check it out later. Alan then heads back to his house next door, and Debbie and Tony with their baby drive across town to Tony's parents' house. After arriving, the stinging sensation on Tony's back has only grown more noticeable. Again, thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finally has his wife take a look at it. Upon lifting up his shirt, she starts to freak out. From Tony's lower back to up by his shoulder blades are what appear to be 3 very distinct and fresh claw marks. Her anxiety is soon felt by everyone in the house. After discussing what had been occurring amongst themselves, the Pickmans now think that what they could be experiencing may be evil. Coming to this conclusion leaves their heads spiraling, making them ponder a number of questions. Just what will they do? Will they go back to the house? Where could they go if they don't? And much more. Together, Debbie and Tony do their best to calm down and to face the decision that they have to make head on as a couple. In Tony's words, "We were newly married. We had just started a family. We didn't have the money or the resources to be able to afford to move again. We were essentially bled out. We had a baby, and we needed a place to stay. So we decided to go back that night." Although incredibly apprehensive about doing so, the Pickmans seemingly have no other choice. The following day, Tony meets up with his brother Alan yet again. Alan seems to have an idea on how to tackle the situation. Alan tells Debbie and Tony that his boss's sister is a psychic medium, and he thinks that they should invite her to try and figure out what could be residing within the house, and if she's able to decipher that. Finding this proposal weird because they've never delved into anything like this before, but feeling like it couldn't hurt to give it a try, they agree to have Alan reach out and ask her to come to the house. 3 days later, she would arrive. Her name was Barbara. Originally based out of California, she actively engaged in psychic work and lectured at various universities about parapsychology. Not having been given any information about the house or its history, she sat in the living room and explained to the Pickmans what it was that she did, and then asked them to tell her everything that had occurred up until that point so that she could fully grasp the whole picture. After they went through it all with Barbara, she then asked them to visit the nursery to begin. Tony would later say that, "I don't really believe in psychics, so I kind of blew her off at first. I didn't know what to think." Barbara begins her process and quickly begins to lose her breath. She starts choking and coughing. She then flees the room, heading for the basement below. Tony later would say that she told us that whatever was here didn't want us here, and that it doesn't like anyone in this room, referring to the nursery. As the Pickmans follow Barbara down the stairs, she soon stops at the bottom of them and begins to sense another spirit, but this one doesn't seem ominous. She discovers that the spirit is that of a 7-year-old little girl named Sallie. She believes Sallie passed away within the home itself. She also would come to the conclusion that it was Sallie who had attacked Tony, believing that baby Taylor was hers to protect. She had become territorial. Between Deborah and Barbara, they come to the consensus that Sallie is a guardian of sorts, that it would be a good idea to set aside a space for her and to give her some toys of her own to appease her. Tony, however, thought that this wasn't a good idea at all. He still believed that whatever dwelled within their house was malevolent and evil, that it was a bad idea for them to interact with whatever this thing was in any way, shape, or form. However, disregarding her husband, Deborah does exactly this. After the psychic departs, several days later, Deborah would go shopping for toys for Sallie, hoping that her offerings would appease the spirit and all would be well. She also picks up the developed film from the photos that Tony took during the psychic's visit. Excited to see if any of them contained an image of Sallie, she quickly opens up the envelope to look at them. What she sees, however, disturbs her. Several of the photos are bizarrely distorted, and one even contains some kind of malignant-looking black blob. Horrified, Deborah rushes back home with the photos and the toys in hand. Walking through the front door, she immediately shows Tony. Having been the one who took the photos, he doesn't know what to make of the anomalies. One photo in particular catches his attention. In his own words, "The picture that really got me as we were walking down the stairs with Barbara. I turned around and took a picture, and floating midair is this thing. I couldn't explain it. It made me scared." Following looking at the photos, Deb once again references Barbara's convictions and continues to believe that Sallie is a protector. She then continues with her plan and makes a dedicated space for Sallie and adds the toys to it. Although Tony believes that the force haunting their home is evil, things do seem to go dormant for a short period of time following the offerings to Sallie. However, this peace would not last. Several weeks later, Deb's sister Karen would return again for a follow-up visit, and this time along with her husband. As the couples catch up on what's been happening in their lives, Deborah and Tony walk into the kitchen and grab themselves and their guests some more food and drinks. Their nice evening is soon interrupted by a piercing scream. There before Karen and her husband, a stuffed animal, the same one that had fallen before, that was sitting in one of the chairs, had suddenly and spontaneously caught fire before their very eyes. As Tony and Deborah rush back into the living room, they too were left flabbergasted at the sight. Tony then rushes in with a towel to extinguish the fire. In his own words, "If it can do this, what's keeping it from setting one of us on fire, or hurting us, or harming the baby?" Following the flames of the previous evening, Deborah tries to convince her husband that the fire was an isolated incident. And for the next 2 weeks, things at the house remain eerily calm. Tony, who works the overnight graveyard shift at a nearby grain elevator, adjusts his day to his schedule. Upon returning home from work in the early morning hours, he tends to eat a meal when he gets home. One particular morning, following the calmness within the home, he grabs himself a glass of juice and something to eat. As he goes to place the pitcher of juice back in the refrigerator, he sees something move out of the corner of his eye. Turning his head, pitcher still in hand, he sees the apparition of a young girl before him. Shocked, he drops the pitcher of juice, and it shatters on the floor. Almost as soon as the pitcher had broke, as it smashed into the floor below, the apparition vanished. Paying no mind to it, Tony quickly runs upstairs where he greets his wife in their bedroom. Barely able to get a word out, he's finally able to say to her, "I just saw Sallie." Intrigued, Deborah immediately asks just what she looked like, and then proceeds to bombard him with many more questions. Rather than being scared, Deb is elated. She's more curious than ever before. In her own words, "I was terribly jealous. Tony got to see this little girl, or the apparition of her. She's curious just why, of all people, Sallie would reveal herself to Tony. She wonders why she didn't reveal herself to her." For the next 2 months, things once again go dormant within the home. But this too wouldn't last. One night, as the moon hangs high above the Pickman residence, as the couple sleeps, Tony is suddenly and violently pulled forward and then up and out of his bed by his arms. Absolutely petrified, Tony screams as he realizes just what has taken place. He then is further bewildered as he looks down at his wrists. There on both of them were 5 distinct finger markings, as if someone or something had grabbed him. But the outline themselves weren't just there. These outlines looked like they were burns, as if the fingers themselves had been seared into his flesh. Blisters were now starting to form where each invisible hand had been. As he tries to come to terms with this terrifying ordeal, Deb still refuses to believe that it has anything to do with Sallie. She thinks that his lack of sleep from being a new father and working the overnight shift have started to get to him. However, upon seeing the blisters, she's almost in a sense of denial, saying that surely the spirit of a 7-year-old girl would not be able to pull a grown man out of a bed or leave such marks. But if she somehow did, what was the message that she was trying to convey? Given everything that had taken place, a resentment began to build within Tony towards his wife. Accompanying this, he began to hear whispers on almost a daily basis. This would typically occur when he would lay down during the day to try and sleep, so he could get back up and work at the grain elevator. To him, the whispers did not sound like that of a child at all, but rather like 3 low-voiced people speaking to one another. They would also seem so close, as if they were talking simultaneously, directly into his ears. During one particularly scary experience involving the whispering, Tony also begins to see items near the bed float and rotate by themselves, as if suspended by an invisible force. As he screams, wanting all of it to stop, he is greeted by his wife. After explaining what he had just experienced, unfortunately, she doesn't believe him, given what he had been saying, that he had been seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers, having nightmares as she perceived them. She thought that lack of sleep and stress was causing him to make things up. Tony is starting to believe that whatever force that haunts the house is targeting him, that it's attempting to manipulate his feelings. Coming to terms with this, he also realizes just how hard it's becoming to hide his growing resentment towards Deborah. He keeps having feelings of a dark rage well up inside him, feelings that he's worried could turn violent. In his own words, "These feelings were not like me. I love her so much, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But the longer we were there, the stronger these feelings were becoming." Tony, of course, wasn't the only one to notice these changes. Deborah noticed them too. There had been a large shift in his demeanor and attitude. He seemed angry, short-fused, and argumentative. The couple began to fight almost daily, which hadn't been like them at all in the past. The Pickmans decide that they want to reach back out to Barbara for another consultation to see if they could potentially gain any new information on the presence that seemed to be everywhere and yet nowhere at the same time. In due time, Barbara again would visit them, and upon her arrival, would be told just how things had developed. She attempts to contact Sallie once again. After she believes she's made contact with her, she then begins to sense a second entity. This one, however, is much older and seems to refuse to interact with her. She believes that this adult entity is a female and the one that has been targeting Tony, and that Sallie has been taking the blame. However, she comes to the conviction that whatever is happening within the home is beyond her expertise. What she does offer, though, is that she would contact a very qualified group of paranormal investigators. Tony's reaction at first is harsh, and in his own words once again. At first, I was like, no way. We live in a small town. We'd be the laughingstock. If it wasn't a spirit in the house, then the only other thing that I could think it could be was the devil. And that scared me to death. After discussing the matter further with his wife and Barbara, he finally agrees to give the group a try. Within days, the paranormal group would arrive. The group is led by, at that time, world-renowned medium and paranormal researcher Peter James. In his words, a ghost is the ethereal double of its physical counterpart. We become a ghost dependent on the circumstances in which we die. If we die untimely, tragically, or violently, then we are rendered a ghost. I prefer not knowing any details about any specific haunting in which I investigate. It's my job to identify what's causing the activity. Not being informed of the information previously, only that the family was young and had a young boy. As he sits in the living room and speaks with the Pickmans, he asks them if they had a young daughter as well, perhaps of 7 or 8 years old. Telling him no, Peter remarked that it was strange because when he arrived, he saw such a young girl staring at them from one of the upstairs windows. Starting to explore the home, Peter begins to sense that there are 2 entities. One that is a child, and the other, an older adult woman who is very powerful. Upon asking the name of the entities out loud, he would reply with, "Sallie, it's good to meet you." As he embarks up the stairs, he makes his way into the Pickmans' master bedroom and starts feeling the presence of the older female. As he steps further into the room, with his crew and the Pickmans behind him, Peter is suddenly thrown back against the door, and almost simultaneously, Tony begins to scream in pain. "My back," he says. Debbie lifts up his shirt and sees that once again, his back is covered in fresh scratches, deep ones, to the point to where they drew blood. Peter is astonished. He now knows that his older woman's presence is not a positive one, telling everyone not to let the entity know that they are afraid of it. They reluctantly press on. The crew spends the rest of the day investigating the home, and during this time, Peter once again begins walking back upstairs, as if something or someone was calling out to him, and it's here that he begins to have a vision. In his vision, he's taken back into the past, and he begins to see the spirits as they were in life. He believed that the home was once the home and practice of a medical physician. His housekeeper and her daughter lived there with him as well. The housekeeper was also his mistress, and the daughter was also his. The housekeeper was African American, and their daughter, half. And in such racially divided times, the affair and their secret child were kept hidden. Sallie was her name, and she was their 7-year-old daughter. Peter believed that Sallie had contracted pneumonia, and her father, although a doctor, was unable to save her. Although the secret family and Sallie's death are tragic, Peter tells the Pickmans that it's not fair for them to be victimized by the dead in their own home, that in order to rid themselves of this torment, that they must cleanse the house, that they were in control, but it was ultimately up to them to restore order. and with these words of advice, he and his crew would depart. The Pickmans decide that they will stay in the house and will do their best to set the rules and stand their ground. Several weeks pass, and despite their best efforts, the atmosphere has only grown heavier, the torment even worse, especially for Tony. His sleep has become even more scarce, and his thoughts grow more and more evil. He can't shake the angry feelings and is becoming more worried that he may end up harming his wife and/or himself, that he feels as if this darkness is slowly consuming him. He finally confronts Deborah and explains exactly how he feels, that he believes that if they don't leave the house, that something horrible may end up happening. Finally understanding the pressure her husband was under, she agrees with him and begins looking at ads for a new home for the family. In the meantime, Tony attempts to sleep due to working the graveyard shift. As he lays in bed, tossing and turning, he is once again consumed by the ever-growing and almost overwhelming thoughts of wanting to harm his family. Feeling as if he was under attack, he rushes out of the room and yells for Deborah. He tells her to grab Taylor, that they were leaving, that he had finally reached his breaking point. Fortunately for the Pickman family, they find a house shortly after leaving what would become known as the Sallie house. The heaviness, the anger, and the spiritual torment would cease. But given what the Pickmans had gone through, it's also important to note that the Sallie house certainly has a dark and checkered history that existed long before their arrival. Originally built in 1867 by the Finney family, it served as a generational home. Several generations of the family lived there between 1867 and 1939. During that time, 5 confirmed deaths occurred within the family. Michael Finney in 1872, Charles, Catherine's father, the wife of Michael Finney, Kate Finney, and Richard Finney in 1874, and finally Agnes Finney in 1939. There are multiple stories about Sallie, that she passed away from pneumonia, the origin I previously told in this story. But there is also another which I will tell you now. The story goes that Charles Finney, the son of Michael and Kate, became a doctor and made the house both his residence and his practice. The front served as an office space and an examination room, while the family lived upstairs. One day, a frantic mother arrived carrying her 6-year-old daughter, Sallie, who had collapsed from severe abdominal pain. The doctor quickly diagnosed her with an appendicitis, and new surgery was urgent. Without delay, he prepped Sallie for the operation using ether, the anesthesia that was available at that time. Tragically, Sallie wasn't fully unconscious, and as the first incision was made, she screamed and thrashed in pain. Despite the doctor's efforts to restrain her and administer more anesthesia, Sallie's condition worsened. She would go into shock and ultimately die on the operating table. Her final moments filled with agony and fear. The home left the Finney family in 1939 and passed through various owners before becoming a rental property. At least one tenant may have been involved in satanic rituals, which some believe contributed to the sinister activity associated with the house. Paranormal activity wasn't reported until Tony and Deborah Pickman began renting the house. Intrigued by the paranormal claims, the property owner Les Smith investigated and discovered a pentagram beneath the basement floorboards. Many believe that this may have been evidence of rituals that summoned something demonic. Subsequent investigations revealed blood evidence in the master bedroom closet and tattered clothing in the attic. After the Pickmans, however, reports of electronic malfunctions, EVPs, physical attacks, and other poltergeist activity have further cemented the house's reputation as a hotspot for paranormal occurrences. I've visited the Sallie house myself. It was actually my very first paranormal investigation, albeit amateur at best at that time. It certainly was an excellent experience getting into the field, and although for a variety of reasons, I don't think the Sallie house is as haunted as it once was. However, we did experience a few strange things. When I went with a few friends of mine, we arrived in the summer of 2022, and it was easily close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the home, being very old, didn't have great AC, as we would later learn. However, when we stepped inside for the first time, we were taken aback because it was absolutely frigid by comparison, but this blast of cold air only lasted several seconds. The temperature did not fluctuate like it had then for the rest of the night. I also remember personally checking the thermostat, and it was set at like 85 or something crazy, so the actual air conditioning wasn't even on until we turned it on. So I found that weird to say the least. The record player and TV turned on by themselves multiple times throughout the night, which, of course, we found odd. The old record player didn't have any sort of a timer whatsoever, and given the age of the CRTV as well, it didn't appear to have a timer that we could find that would have caused this. Besides some strange feelings throughout the day and then into the night, we didn't get a ton of interaction. Through the kitchen, although it was blocked off, we decided to look past it and go down the stairs and witness the pentagram, which for one reason or another had been burned out on the floor in the basement. And I do have to say that the basement itself was extremely creepy. You could feel some very bad vibes originating from there. So I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of black magic ritual or rituals were potentially done down there. I almost forgot, but as I was reviewing the original footage, I did find that we did capture an EVP, and I'll go ahead and play that for you now. With black mold in the walls of this very old home, we decided not to stay overnight because you weren't supposed to sleep there anyways. Having taken plenty of video and photo evidence, we began to place things we had taken from Sallie's room back. And when my friend, whose name is also Cody, but with a C, placed one of those magic 8-ball toys back on the bed, a touch-activated toy decided to go off on its own. In this particular one, you had to tap its head fairly hard to get it to go off. I remember all of us being freaked out by it. I remember it was extremely foggy that night, which added to the mystique, especially of my first paranormal adventure for sure. Or one that didn't occur, of course, in a home that I lived in. We took one last look at the Sallie house before departing, and to our shock, all the lights decided to turn on within the home. From what we could see, both the upstairs and the main floor lights. The breaker was the original, so this too seems rather impossible to have just occurred on its own, without some kind of ghostly intervention. Our code only worked for entering, so we weren't able to get back into the home following this. But granted, it was 2 a.m. at this point, so we decided to drive home. We would hit a pothole, and one of our tires kept going flat on our way home, which definitely was not fun. All around, I would return knowing what I know now and having much better equipment and resources and far more experienced friends by my side. I think we would catch a lot more. It's my belief that for one reason or another that the Sallie houses may be dormant or not as haunted as it once was, and that it's still very possible that a demonic presence still slithers within its walls, masquerading itself as the soul of a little girl named Sallie. I took the original documentary down due to some copyrighted image issues earlier this year, as well as the origin story that I had originally made, but I think I did a far better job this time anyways. but some of the photos and footage I've shown you while explaining my trip there, I originally took and filmed myself. The Sallie house was made famous in part by the old show Sightings, who filmed a segment for an episode on it, which was picked up by local and then later national media, as well as Deborah Pickman would go on to write a book, which I've found to be a great read, called The Sallie House Haunting, which you can find on Amazon, and I'll link it below. With that being said, would you like to see me return to the Sallie house for a proper investigation? And what are your thoughts on the case? What do you think is still haunting this Topeka, Kansas house? Let me know down in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video around. All this stuff helps me out tremendously. I did want to take a moment to thank you guys for always having my back. I truly need the support and encouragement some days, and I can't emphasize that enough. I have revamped my store with some better merch designs, and I'm running a bundle deal on my 2 books that if you buy them together, you save some money, and I ship those out myself as well as sign them for you. I did want to mention that if you want to watch all my content ad-free, you can join via YouTube memberships by hitting join on my channel, or visit patreon.com/mystery archives to become a patron. Again, thank you all so very much for everything. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.